Karen, thank you for sitting down with me.
You're welcome, Jordan.
First of all, could we get a bit of a background about yourself?
Absolutely. So my name's Karen Smillie, and I am part of the Aongatete Forest Project volunteer group, and I also happen to be on the board, or the trustee groups, and I'm the deputy chair of Aongatete Forest Project.
Cool. And whereabouts is Aongatete?
Aongatete itself, the forest, is it's a lowland forest on the foothills of the Kaimai-Mamaku Ranges. It's about 35-ish kilometres north of Tauranga. Just off State Highway 2. So it's actually quite accessible for a large majority of the population of the Western Bay of Plenty.
Cool, awesome. And how big is the forest that's being...
Our area, the area that we have under pest management with our volunteers, is 500 hectares. It didn't start out as 500 hectares. It grew from a much smaller 89 hectare group, and then we've expanded over the years. So we've been going almost 20 years, started in 2006.
Amazing. And I bet there's been lots of progress and success over that time.
Yes, there has been. There's been certainly several steps forward, a couple of steps backwards, as you always get with conservation projects. But in the main, the progress that we've made by the sustained pressure on the predators in this particular part of the forest has made quite a difference.
Cool, awesome. And have you always been in the Western Bay? Is this your...
This is indeed my home. So I was born in Tauranga, and like a lot of people, I moved away for a significant portion of my working career, and then several years ago I said, that's it, I don't want to live in Auckland anymore, I want to come home, and we made the move back to the Bay of Plenty. And the minute we did, I said, okay, so now it's time to put my fingers back into the whenua, essentially, and I wanted to volunteer for environmentally focused projects, and Aongatete is in fact on my doorstep. I don't live very far from here, so it's perfect.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So when you were in Auckland, it was a different sort of career path?
Absolutely. So I had a career in FMCG, fast moving consumer goods, and I actually have a science and engineering background. Essentially, I'm a food technologist, but I got into marketing, and that was where I spent most of my working career. And that's been fantastic for the role that I fulfil with Aongatete Forest Project, actually, because I look after the marketing and the comms and that sort of stuff. So it's great to have a mix of skills on a board, and so I can bring that I suppose that marketing approach to things.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Amazing. And would it have been a bit of a surprise to your family and friends from growing up that you've now transitioned to working in nature? And
actually, that's a really good question. It might well be. I've never asked anybody that. To me, I've always had a love of our native bush. In fact, I can probably pinpoint the moment where our ngahere became important to me. I think it was probably about 7 or 8. We'd gone on a school trip to Whakamarama, which is in fact a forest not very far from here, slightly closer towards Tauranga, and we did a bushwalk as kids do. And I can just remember the smell, the sound of the birds, the smell of the forest, and thinking how incredibly special it was. And that stuck with me from when I was that age, as I say, 7 or 8, right through until I was an adult, and thinking, well, and understanding the pressure and the distress that our forests were under in terms of attack from invasive predators. And it was something that just came naturally to me to want to get back into it. Yeah.
very
just
cool.
Some sort of weird attachment, I guess.
Yeah, and it just kind of sitting there in the back of your mind.
Absolutely, the whole time. Yep. I've never been a big bushwalker or a tramper, and I've never done anything more adventurous than the root burn. But the forest itself is really special. Yeah.
Cool. So when did you move back to the Western Bay?
2016-ish, and I spent a year finding my feet, moving out of the big smoke and moving semi-rurally, and then 2017, towards the end of, I thought, right, time to start volunteering. So I came up to Aongatete Forest Project on a volunteer day, just an ordinary volunteer day, and I was fortunate enough to go into the forest with the then chairperson of the trust, Barbara McGillivray, and she took me into the forest, and her and I had a great old chat the whole time we were doing a bait line, and I felt like I belonged. So from that point forward, I've just ingratiated myself into the volunteer group, and then was asked to step onto the trust itself. So that was wonderful.
How cool. I mean, that's probably the best way to do it, isn't it? Getting all that kind of groundwork experience first to know how it all works.
Sussing it out, making sure that you're a fit, they're a fit, all the rest of it. And then, And I'm a bit of a busybody and a bit of an organizer. So when I see something that I like and I think I can help, I tend to stick my oar in. I want to have my 2 cents worth. So, yeah.
So you're probably already providing a lot of value while you were just volunteering then. And
Possibly. I don't know. You'd have to ask the others. I don't know. Yeah.
Cool. And is Aongatete Forest Project the only thing that you're kind of working on? Or?
It's like, as with many of these things, you'll find this when you talk to volunteers. I think once they start with one thing, it becomes a bit of an addiction. And so I'm also part of a larger scale, landscape scale biodiversity and freshwater improvement project. It's called Project Paurore, and it's
Cool.
focused on the northern Tauranga Harbour as well. And so that's something I'm a board member of, and also actively involved as a volunteer. And the area we are now in Aongatete is the southern boundary of the Project Paurore Rohi, which stretches all the way to Athenry, or the Waiau catchment in the north of the Tauranga Moana. So it's as I say, it's focused on biodiversity and freshwater quality improvements, but it dovetails nicely with what we're doing here in the forest.
Wow, cool.
Yeah.
I'll have to get in touch with them and
Yeah,
have another conversation.
Podcast number 2 coming up.
Yeah. So you've been working essentially in conservation since around 2017 then, when you started volunteering?
Correct, hands-on stuff, yep.
Cool. And what's your favourite thing about working in nature since you've started?
It's there's a restoration of your spirit, like a rebalancing of who you are when you spend time in nature. And I think that's what it's really important to me to have that aspect kind of calm me down and slow me down a little bit. So I find that very valuable. But just knowing that I'm doing my little bit, it's like that whole when you go for a walk, pick up 3 pieces of rubbish every time you go. And if everyone did that, the collective impact of all of our efforts would be exponentially greater. And I just feel like I'm doing my little bit for the sustainability of our environment and our future as a human race, because we're going the wrong way about looking after things at the moment.
Cool.
Yeah.
And particularly working in this project, what's kind of your favourite kind of thing to work on? Any species or?
Aongatete Forest Project, predominantly, obviously, we look after the forest in terms of managing the pest pressure. There's been a little bit of restoration in terms of bringing some of the more threatened plant species back to our forest. I haven't been specifically hands-on with that, but my favourite thing really is the bird life and listening for and watching. I do a lot of bird counting, 5-minute bird counts, and so I just really enjoy listening and spotting species, basically.
Cool.
A bit of a bird nerd, to be quite honest.
Yeah. Cool. What bird, if you hear a bird when you're doing these bird counts, what's the one that gets you really excited?
It's always exciting when you hear titi pounamu, also a rifleman, because they're elusive because they're so bloody tiny and quick and quiet. And you have to. I'm not looking forward to the day when I lose that range of my hearing, where I will be able to stop hearing them. But at the moment, I have no trouble. So the titi pounamu is awesome, and then ironically, my favourite bird's probably the tautawai, or the North Island robin, simply because they are so much more inquisitive and interactive. And if you sit still, and they'll come to you. And I love watching them feeding and their quirky little nature. So yeah, the tautawai is probably my favourite bird. But birds in general float my boat.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah.
All right. Shall we get a little bit deeper into Aongatete Forest Project itself? A little bit about the history, if you could.
So a potted history of Aongatete. It actually goes rewind. If you can rewind right back into the 70s, when New Zealand didn't have a Department of Conservation, we had a New Zealand Forest Service, and the New Zealand Forest Service were in fact eyeing up the kaimai mamaku for conversion to exotic forestry to feed the rapacious demands of the newly built Kinleith pulp and paper mill. And there were back then, I suppose the term's can be used pejoratively, but generally there were a group of concerned individuals, or greenies, who thought, hang on, this is not a good idea, so the likes of forest and bird. And there was a lot of lobbying to stop the clear felling of our native forest in the kaimai mamaku. Roll forward into the 80s, there was they had some success. The kaimai mamaku unfortunately never regained the status that we were seeking, which was to have it converted into a national park. It only became a forest park, which gives it a whole lower level of protection. But in the 80s, when the Department of Conservation was formed, everyone breathed a sigh of relief and thought, that's it. No one's going to have a crack at logging this forest anymore. We can all unclench our collective butt cheeks and relax. The forest will be fine. Then jump forward to the late 90s, And some of the early stalwarts who were spearheading the charge for the protection of the Kaimai Mamaku had a look in the forest and thought, hang on a minute, where's the kokako? No one's heard kiwi here for a while. What's going on? And it turns out the forest was basically knackered. And it was the assumption that the forest would be okay on its own proved to be a falsehood. And in fact, the forest wasn't okay. The predators and pests were having a field day. And it was very quickly coming to the point where if we didn't do something, this forest is going to collapse. And out of that, some very, very important people, and particularly the Grahams, Anne and Basil Graham, who are long-time forest and bird members and have had a significant impact on conservation in the Bay of Plenty, got together and said, we need to do something. Let's find some forest, let's protect it. Let's show the rest of this community what will happen if we actually look after the forest. Let's restore it, and then we can advocate and demonstrate that the rest of the Kaimai need the same sort of protection. So that's how it got started, and the trust was formed in 2006, and pest control started very shortly thereafter on a very small amount of land, so 89 hectares in this area that we're in now. This bit of the forest was selected primarily because it's on an ecological boundary. So it's the boundary between the Kauri forest to the north and the Rimu forest to the south. It's lowland forest, so it contains an interesting number of species, from puriri and koikoi up to the tawas and the miros and all that sort of stuff, the bigger forest trees. It's accessible to a reasonable population base, and it was part of the forest that needed looking after. It was starting to show signs of serious wear and tear, shall we say. That was why it was picked. And once the trust got going and the volunteer base expanded, the forest area under protection also expanded from 89 hectares originally to about 250. Then Forest and Bird funded a second 250 hectares that was adjacent, so the entire forest was 500 hectares under pest management. But the early trust got going with the support of Katikati Rotary, and also our local hapu Te Rere Atukahia Marae, and our first patron was Pai Wanakore, who's one of the kaumātua from that marae. So,
Amazing. And I understand that it was all old growth still, isn't it? It's just been
it's
knackered
not,
in the understory.
Yeah, it's technically not. It's not virgin forest because it has been selectively logged. Parts of our forest have had stock through them in the recent past. So it's original, but it's not virgin. Yeah, Aongatete was. It was lucky in that it didn't have a lot of particularly valuable timber. It had everything, but not in huge quantities. So the forest to the south of us has been quite heavily logged, and the forest to the north of us has been as well because of the type of timber. But this little area here was fortunately not clear-felled, and it wasn't heavily logged because it didn't have the species that it needed. But it's got a little bit of everything.
Yeah, that's incredible that there's some being lowland forest as well. Those are the areas that got cleared first.
Exactly. I mean, we're sitting right here. Right where we're sitting is the boundary of, basically, we've got farmland over one shoulder and we've got forest over the other. So the Kaimai was indeed, all of that lowland forest was cleared right up to where it started to get a bit tricky. There's a lot of hill country around here that is still farmed, and that's actually the other thing the other project that I'm involved with is focused on retiring as much of that class 6 and 7 land as possible because it's not suitable for agriculture.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that's a little bit of what's behind you at the moment. There's the replanting of what used to be grazed by cattle, and there's a little bit of...
Yes. We up until 4 or so years ago, this paddock was being fertilised by some cows, and we've planted the steeper slopes, and it'll just once it gets going, it'll take over and look after itself, basically. Yeah.
And is there a lot of planting that goes on, or is this kind of
This is it. What you can see here is pretty much it. We have got some plans to extend the planting. We're going to focus on some rongoa plants around the kohanga so that we can demonstrate some of the species that are more important for traditional medicinal uses. But we want to keep a bit of flat area for parking, ironically, and extend this area just slightly so that there's less requirement for upkeep. It's one of those, we still need to spend a bit of fossil fuel on the mowing of the lower areas, so we're trying to minimise that where possible. Yeah.
Cool. So what is the main works that Aongatete Forest Project actually carries out then?
So our primary focus is the management of the key predator species or pest species, so possums, rats, mustelids, hedgehogs, We're not actively trapping feral cats at this point in time, and nor are we targeting ungulates, so deer and pigs are also outside our mandate. So we look at the majority of our volunteer effort is invested in possum control, mustelid control, and rat control. The things that make a big difference to our invertebrate and bird species.
Are there a lot of feral cats in here as well, or?
Interesting question. We're not entirely sure. We haven't had any trail camera footage for a wee while, but we know they're here. There's no two ways about it, because we know that they live everywhere in the bush. They're not like most things. They're not seen on a regular basis. Meaning cats never are. We see a lot more sign of other things like pigs and deer than we do of cats. Yeah, so it's an unknown quantity, but because we are. Because we're close to a population base, which means that obviously stray cats and dumped cats are always going to be an issue. Yeah, but no. With cats, live trapping is the key, and live trapping is problematic because of the requirement to check the traps within 12 hours of dawn, and it's just hard getting the volunteer base to do that, especially if you're talking about trekking several kilometres into the bush to check live capture traps.
Right.
It's a solution. It's a problem that's looking for a solution, and I know that there are more advanced trapping solutions out there. So that's something we might be considering in the future.
And that's an animal ethics thing, is it?
Very much so.
12 hours?
Absolutely. Well, it's animal welfare. So if we're going to we don't like killing things, but if we're going to do it, we want to do it as ethically and humanely as possible.
Yeah.
For sure.
Cool. And when you're controlling these predatory mammals,
yes,
what species are you trying to protect mainly by doing so?
It's the entire strata of the forest ecosystem, really. So right from the seed source for us the seeds, the rats eating the seeds for all of our trees and saplings, right through to the invertebrates that our insectivorous species feed on, so the likes of the fantails and the totowai and the titiponamu, right up to the big fat kiriru who's sitting up in the trees and living off the miro and tawa berries and things like that. So it's the entire strata. So all of those animals, we're trying to enhance their daily lives by making sure they've got enough food, and also their breeding success by making sure that they're not predated on whilst they're in the nest.
Cool. And some of these species have actually shown up more recently since all of this.
Yeah, we think so. So it wasn't, put it this way, riflemen or titiponamu were not a common sight around here prior to about 2015. We suspect there were remnant birds maybe left, potentially even slightly higher up the Kaimai, where it's a bit colder and damper and most animals don't choose to live. But once titiponamu was sighted, it became abundantly obvious that the numbers were increasing year on year, and then they were first observed nesting in about 2015. 16, and since then we've had our own nest box program, and it's a species that's definitely become more abundant in the time that the project's been operating. Even species that like robin have certainly become more obvious. Some species we think may have gone through fluxes. Miro tomtit. The comment has been made that maybe there's less miro than there used to be, and it's possible that as the birds occupy their own ecological niches, that maybe, well, now that we've got more robin and riflemen, we've got less miro. It's hard to know because they're all looking out, they're all eating the same things. But there's a couple of other species that I've not heard personally, so the likes of the whitehead, that people have reported them in our forest, but I've not seen them. So theoretically, our forest should be able to sustain populations of those birds. But the birds that we used to have that are no longer here, such as the kōkako, such as the kiwi, those birds would require an aggressive and managed reintroduction because we certainly don't have any remnant populations nearby. And we don't have, to be honest, we don't have enough area here, unfortunately, to be able to currently think about reintroduction of those type of species.
Right. And it's not just birds, is it? Is there some bats that are
we have peka, we've got long-tailed bat. They're extremely elusive, but we know that they're here because we've done some bat monitoring and picked up the sounds of bats. And we've got other species that are the ones that can't run away, like the trees and things. And some years ago there was an introduction of the weka to this forest. Weka was selected as a species that because they're there his debatable engaging nature, that would be and there used to be weka here. In fact, weka obviously used to be incredibly abundant. So weka were chosen as a reintroduction species to this particular forest. The weka I like to think of it as the weka experiment because they were introduced, but they didn't hang around for very long. So once they were released from the enclosure that they were put in to adapt them to the forest, they seemed to decide that perhaps Aongatete wasn't for them, and they they decamped. I wasn't part of the project at that point in time, but the Great Weka experiment, it wasn't a failure because the birds obviously dispersed. Where to, one doesn't know, but they didn't hang around. So yeah, that's a good lesson. That's probably the one thing that the trust has done that everyone probably sat back and went, maybe we could have done that a little differently. Yeah.
So they haven't been seen anywhere else?
Funnily enough, they have been spotted. In fact, in Aomokoroa, which is an urban peninsula not very far from here, I've seen video footage of a confirmed weka wandering down a cul-de-sac on a grass verge. That was that was probably 3 or 4 years ago now. So there may be, who knows, some of the Aongatete weka may have just moved on and camped out and are somewhere and are keeping a very low profile. We don't know, but yeah, that's certainly not. No one's spotted a weka that I know of here in the forest since about 2017.
Right.
Yeah.
And was that when they were translocated?
Yeah, that happened. The translocation happened in 2015 and 16, I think it was.
So they did not stick around for long at all.
Not very long. No, they have I've since learned that they have a particularly aggressive homing instinct, and they maybe they all thought, stuff this. Let's go back. Let's head home. Who knows? Yeah.
Right.
I'm only speculating. Yeah.
Are there any lizard species or frogs or?
Now you're asking the hard questions. I think there may be frogs in terms of the Hofstadter's frog. I believe we've got Hofstadter's. We've done some eDNA analysis on the two main rivers, the Whatakau and the Aongatete River. And I'm pretty sure frog DNA turned up in at least one of the samples, and that would be the Hofstadter's. Lizards are not a common sight around here. I assume we've probably got the forest gecko. I know because my neighbour has got a forest gecko living on his deck, and that's not very far as the crow flies from here. So I assume that the forest gecko is probably thriving in this area. Hard to see. You've got to be pretty patient to wait for to find any of our lizard and gecko species.
Yeah, absolutely. I've only ever found one gecko in the wild. So
yeah, no, you've really got to know what you're doing.
Very cryptic.
Very much so. Yeah.
You just mentioned eDNA for the streams. Could you talk about that?
So I don't know how familiar everyone is with eDNA, but it's a way of figuring out what you've got right from the entire tree of life that you have in the surrounding area by analysing DNA fragments in water, in fresh water in particular. So we took samples of our two boundary streams, and sent them to Wildlab in Wellington, who do the eDNA analysis, and they pick up the fragments of the DNA from all of the species, right from protozoa and bacteria and fungi and things like that, right through to your higher animals. So an eDNA sample is teeming with life, right from algae and the vegetation that's around a stream, through to the fish that live in it, so our native species, the galaxids, and right up to the mammals and birds, which are clearly pooping in the stream. I imagine that's how most of the DNA must get in the stream. So you can pick up anything from a blackbird to a possum to a deer to a human, even right up to the apex predator of the whole shebang. So it's a really interesting way of, if you think you might have something and it's elusive and you've never seen it, by analysing the water, you can tell whether you've got it or not because it shows up. So I believe eDNA is quite effective it basically, you can think about from a kilometre upstream, it's picking up the DNA of the creatures that are interacting with the water source. But the sampling technique requires, you do need several samples, and and the information is useful, but it's also it's quite technical, if you know what I mean. Like you've really got to be really very interested in the web of life before eDNA becomes that relevant to an everyday project.
Yeah. And for the listeners, the E in eDNA stands for environmental DNA.
I forgot to say that. That's right. It's not electronic DNA. No, it's environmental DNA. Yeah. It's an incredible piece of science. I love it.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Were there any surprising findings from the eDNA studies that
Not
were
that I
done here?
recall. As I say, I think I was surprised about what was missing. We didn't get a lot of bird eDNA, for example, and so that was it's kind of like, oh, okay. So where's but maybe that's just a lack of interaction with the water sources. Some of the fish, long-finned eel, the likes of the kōkapū. So it's nice to know that these fish are surviving in our streams. But it would be really neat to have more evidence of the likes of some of our frogs. Not that there's that many of them, and we know that at some stage our rivers, in particular in the Aongatete River, could be quite good habitat for the likes of whio or the blue duck, but they are no longer present in this area, and it would require quite a strong trapping effort, particularly for the stoats and mustelids, to be able to reintroduce whio to this area. But no, I can't recall off the top of my head. It was 3 or 4 years ago that we did the eDNA. Yeah. But there was the standard, there's possums, there were deer, there was standard, there was rats. It's all the things we know we've got. I think the surprise might have been one of the frogs.
Yeah, cool. And is there plans to do a follow-up of that?
We haven't actually talked about that as a trust, but it would be a good idea to do, but only because I'm scientifically curious. So perhaps I just think it's quite a neat thing to do, but not everybody, I suspect. It doesn't float their boat quite so much. So
Yeah. Because I guess things like the birds would only show up every so often. So
that's exactly right. You were talking about a fast-flowing watercourse, and if a bird has not recently visited or flown over the stream, bird counts are a far more effective way of monitoring the bird population in this particular area, because that's a far more positive identification. Yeah.
I could imagine the eDNA is probably more expensive as well. So
it is. We were very fortunate that early on, when eDNA was being promoted as a tool, the Environmental Protection Agency they've got a program which was supporting community groups to do their own eDNA sampling, and a lot of the testing was funded. The sampling kits were given to us for free, and the regional council also supported our efforts in that regard. So we haven't had to spend money on that testing. It might be something that if we wanted to do a more thorough or scientifically validated set of testing, we'd probably have to set aside some funds for it. Yeah.
So you've mentioned that there were weka translocations.
Yes.
Was there any other translocations that have taken place?
In terms of
or reintroductions?
In terms of the birds, no, weka are the only one. But we have brought in some things that can't run away, so some plant species, and those include dactylanthus, or the wood rose. So seeds from that have been planted in some very top secret locations in the forest. And that was probably 5 or so years ago now. And those plots are being revisited on an annual basis to see if there's any sign of life. But I believe that the wood rose, dactylanthus, can take quite some time to show itself. And then you've got to be lucky to be in the Johnny on the spot at the right time, in case it's been browsed, because that's the problem with it, is that it's particularly flavoursome to possums and rats, I think. And the other thing that's been reintroduced is some epiphytic pittosporum species. So our chairperson, James Denyer, he's a mad keen botanist, to be quite honest. He's got an incredibly encyclopedic plant knowledge, and it was James's idea to bring back some bloody birds. It was his idea to bring some of the more endangered epiphyte species back to this area. So he sourced the seed further up the Kaimai. He grew the seed in his backyard into something that was a sapling stage, and then we put those seedlings into some Estelia epiphytes high up in a pūrere tree in the forest. So we've got some magnificent pūrere here in this forest, and James selected a tree, and we got a couple of expert tree climbers to translocate these epiphytes. It's 2 species of pittosporum, including the Kirkai variety, which is highly palatable browsers, which is why there's not much of it left. And they're busy. Unfortunately, they're all well above my eyesight. They're meters up in this canopy, so I'm not entirely sure how well they're doing. But James assures me recently that he can see at least one of them growing. So there you go.
Cool.
Yeah.
Would you be able to give a brief description of what an epiphyte is for the listeners?
An epiphyte is a tree or a plant that grows on another plant. It's effectively, it requires something else for support. So these epiphytes that we translocated are, in fact, it's a double whammy, because it's an epiphyte pittosporum growing on an astelia, which in itself is an epiphyte growing on, so a plant that's growing on another tree for support, so growing on a pūrere. So you look up in the canopy and there's these incredibly weird flax-like looking things growing often in the forked branches of a tree that have made their home in an aerial fashion. So they rely on the host tree for support in general, and they're not parasitic, and they're not necessarily taking from the tree that they're living on. They need it as a support system. So they collect the nutrients from rainwater and leaf litter and other things that collect in the mass of that particular plant. So is that a reasonable description of an epiphyte?
Yes, it's kind of a sneaky strategy for those plants to reach higher into the canopy, isn't
exactly,
it?
and to get out of the
sunlight.
get their fair share of the UV. Absolutely, yeah.
So they usually kind of grow in kind of like the junction between the branches and the trunk.
They're always in some sort of secure position. They don't, although there are plenty of species like there's some native mistletoes which actually they require the tree for nutrients, because they actually tap into the tree.
The parasitic ones.
Parasitic, yeah.
Much like the dactylanthus is another parasite.
Correct,
isn't it?
yes, which an underground parasite. Yeah.
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 Cool. So has there been any indication of trapping success over the years?
Well, we obviously, like any good predator control project, we monitor, and we use a variety of monitoring techniques. So for bird abundance, we've been doing 5-minute bird counts. We look at our rat tracking tunnels, or RTIs, or rat tracking indices. So we monitor before and after every pest control campaign that we do. We have a series of, there's 10 lines out in the forest that are permanently located. 2 of them are actually outside of our managed area, so we use those 2 lines as control lines, and they've got 20 tunnels on them, and then we've got another 80 tunnels in the area, so we keep an eye on what our rat numbers are like. And then we also have a foliar browse index, which the regional council help us with every 2 or so years, and we also have a residual trap count for possums, which again the regional council assist us to fund. They fund a contractor to come and do an RTC, or a residual trap count, every 2 years. In fact, we've just had that done. So our RTC for 2024 for possums is 5%, and 5% is good. 5% is basically what lower than that's great, but 5% is what you're aiming for in terms of predator management. The last RTC we had done was 2 years ago, and that was actually 3.5%, but it was particularly inhospitable conditions. It was really wet, and that's not ideal for doing RTCs. Our rodent indices vary anywhere from very low 3% right up to, you can get as high as 30 or 40%, depending on the life cycle and the climatic conditions at the time and the food sources. But we like to keep we prefer a single digit RTI. And because we have the control lines outside of the forest to monitor it too, provided we're lower than it's always reassuring to know that we're lower than the non-pest control part of the forest, which can be as high as 80% rat abundance. All of those things go to forming a picture of how effective our predator control work is. We know that we've got a really good handle on possum numbers. We are doing enough baiting campaigns that we're keeping rats suppressed effectively. The stoats, of course, everyone knows how cunning mustelids are, so we've got a perimeter trapping network, and we don't catch a lot of stoats, but we catch them periodically, so we know that they are a risk for us. The one thing that we don't control, and we know is a problem for our forest, are the ungulates, in particular deer and pigs. And deer browse is something that we see every time we go into the forest. You can see presence of deer, and it's a thorn in our side as conservationists. There's quite a creative tension between those of us who believe that deer don't belong in the forest and the members of the community who are quite happy with their presence. So it's something that we'd like the numbers to be as low as possible, and we have in fact engaged professionals to do a deer cull in our forest. We had a professional deer cull last year, just to see if we could take out the population that was camping or basically living in our patch of bush. But deer numbers are low, but they're the problem is that you can't see what's not there. So we know that there are species that have been browsed virtually out of existence in our forest, and they can't make it come back.
Right, and one of those species I understand is the king fern, isn't it?
Yes, so para or king fern. We have some king fern. In fact, we found a remnant grove of king fern was discovered several years ago in an area where deer found it very hard to reach. When you see the terrain, you understand why, because it's a very sort of a small bluff, and there was a tree fall blocking access. And what was terrific is that we had a collaboration with the Tauranga branch of the Deerstalkers Association, and together the deerstalkers and our volunteers built a deer exclusion fence around this para. They were all small, but they were still there, and the difference that exclusion fence has made is phenomenal. In terms of the king fern have just gone absolutely gangbusters. They're huge now, and it's only taken 4 or 5 years. And the rest of the vegetation in the area where deer can't get into is also the contrast between inside the fence and outside the fence is stark. There's a big difference between what deer are browsing and what they're not.
Yeah.
We keep the location, it sounds a bit weird, but we do keep the location of our deer exclosure relatively on the down low, because we don't want a lot of people traipsing in and out of it. It's not for public consumption.
Right.
It's an area of the forest that to us is quite special, and we want to make sure that it's protected.
How big is that?
Now again, I don't know the exact square meterage of the exclosure. It's not tiny. It might be 100 metres by 100 metres. It's not a tiny area. It's a reasonable amount of fencing. So yeah, it's big enough to make quite a difference, if you know what I mean. The difference between that and we've got a demonstration plot which is just off one of the main tracks here, and it's not a high deer fence. It's only an 8-wire fence. I think it's 8 wires, and we planted some king fern there as well, so that people can see what a king fern looks like. And that would be 30 metres squared, but that gives people a taste of what happens when you can control the amount of ungulate browsing pressure that happens in a forest. So yeah.
Cool. And there is permits for hunters to come out here to...
Absolutely. So this is Department of Conservation land, and you can be a hunter and apply for a hunting permit. And so we have pig hunters and deer hunters that frequent this forest for recreational hunting purposes. There are some of the local hunters have got their eye, and they're very good. Then they can extract a fair amount of bushmeat from time to time. We've seen hunters come out with pig and deer carcasses over their shoulders. So but I don't know how far back into the bush they have to go. We are right on the fringe, obviously, where the farmland meets the forest, and the tracks from here go right back and cross over the Aongatete River and head right up to the north-south track, which is the main track that traverses the spine of the Kaimai. So there's an active hunting population. All I would do is I would encourage hunters to get stuck in. If you've got spare time and you love it, get in the bush.
Yep.
Yeah, help yourself. Go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. If it helps the understory to come back,
absolutely.
Then,
please just come and take it. Yeah, it's in there. I'm not a hunter myself, so I don't understand the ins and outs of hunting, but I'm delighted whenever I see a carcass being taken out of the bush.
Yeah. And there are some accommodation kind of lodge-like things further up into the bushes
So the Kaimai itself has a fairly good track network and a network of huts. They're not massive. None of the huts in the Kaimai are massive, and there's a trust, the Kaimai Ridgeway Trust, which is another group of volunteers who and a lot of them are hunters and tramping enthusiasts, and they all work together to maintain the network of tracks and huts, because as we all know, the Department of Conservation is severely stretched in terms of its budget. So all the work that volunteers can do to maintain the infrastructure and the biodiversity of our forest is, it's A, it's essential, and B, it's greatly appreciated.
Yeah. Could we talk about some of the experiences that are kind of available to people that come and visit this?
Absolutely.
Place?
So Aongatete Forest itself, because it's readily accessible, it's got 2 great tracks that are loops. So we have a very imaginatively named the short loop and the long loop. The short loop takes about an hour. The long loop's a sort of 3 to 4 hour walk. The long loop it traverses a couple of streams as well. So that's fantastic. Those are great walks. We have a very popular swimming hole down by the Aongatete River. So in summertime, it's a half-hour walk down to the river from the car park, and that swimming hole is extremely popular in the summertime. We've got some lovely deep pools. Watch the rocks though; they are slippery. Even educated grown-ups have slipped over and broken their elbows and things like that. I know because I was talking to one of them the other day. The Aongatete Outdoor Education Centre is a marvellous facility which shares the forest with us. They are just over my shoulder and in the forest, and they've been running since the early 1980s, and it's again managed by a trust, and they have accommodation and educational facilities predominantly for school children, and it's a great way for classes of kids to immerse themselves in the environment. They have qualified outdoor educators who can teach children about the variety of skills and bushcraft that are required. And we work very closely now with the Education Centre because the value of the forest to their activities, clearly it's hand in glove. The two things go together. So the way that we protect the forest is supported by the Outdoor Education Centre itself.
Cool. So there's a bit of collaboration going
Very
on.
much. I like to think that we're two peas in a pod. We've got common goals, aims, and aspirations, and there is a bit of collaboration. It's great.
Yeah. And Aongatete Forest Project actually has their own little building that's behind
We
you.
do. We call it the kohanga or nest, and for many years, the pioneers of our project, for many years, when they wanted to come up to the forest and do some baiting, they had to drag a trailer up with them that contained all of the bait, and then somebody had to sit in the car park and with the trailer and wait till everyone came out of the bush. Not particularly hospitable. And in 2016, the trustees managed to get a small shelter built, which basically housed a porch and a storage room, which is very useful for on-site storage of things like traps and baits. So that was a bit of a game changer in terms of having a permanent presence on site. Also means that from a branding perspective, you've got somewhere to put a rather large logo so that everyone who comes to the forest knows that you're here and the work that you're doing. And then 2 years ago, we were very fortunate. We applied to the Western Bay of Plenty District Council and to the Detect, which is a philanthropic trust, the Tauranga Electricity Consumer Trust, for funding to extend the kohanga, because it was becoming apparent that with the increase in the focus on education, in particular with the creation of something called Bay Conservation Alliance, which is an umbrella organisation that looks after a number of conservation and environmental groups within the Bay of Plenty. BCA, or Bay Conservation Alliance, focused very heavily on education, and we are proud to partner with them. We're one of the founding members of BCA, and we have school groups up here, and school groups can vary in size from 20 kids up to 60. And it's great to have a facility where if the weather's a little bit inclement, people can be kept out of the rain and also out of the sun. So our kohanga now is comfortably house 2 classrooms of children and a whole lot of volunteers as well. So we've got a fantastic facility that means that we can just share what we do with everybody else in the community. And it's a community facility, so people are welcome to come and use it. That's what it's there for. It's a great wee asset, shall we say, that the trust is very, very proud of.
Cool. Those education programs, what sort of age children are you targeting that towards?
It's with Bay Conservation Alliance, they're predominantly looking at a secondary school education, but they also have primary school programs as well. So I've seen 7 and 8 year olds right up to 15, 16 year olds up here in the forest. BCA's program, as I say, I think it's predominantly geared towards secondary schools, but the forest itself, where there's a nature loop in the forest, which is geared for younger children as well. So it's wonderful. Yeah.
And the education doesn't just stop here. I mean, I've had a look at the website, and it's very well designed, and there's lots of great stuff on there. So
I might have had something to do with that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great. Because usually, obviously, like designing a good website is costly as well. So
absolutely. It doesn't have to be though. Fortunately, the people who helped us, one of our trustees got our website presence going, David Peters. He's very IT savvy, and he said, hang on a minute, why don't we have a website? So he created, off his own bat, created our original website. Then I came along and said, I think it's time to give it a bit, zhuzh it up a wee bit. And so we we invested a small sum of money with a local design agency who were keen on the work that we were doing, and so they cut us a bit of a deal as well. And so we got some great value for money from Polonia Design, and we put the website together. It's in its current guise. It's nearly 5 years old, which I'm being told is quite long in the tooth for a website. So it probably is due for a refresh. And in fact, it's on the Trust's radar to refresh the website towards the end of this year. But the site itself, it's really important that you have an easy to navigate site that provides some of the key details that visitors to the forest are looking for, which is what is there to do, what is there to see, and if they want to get involved with the project, when and how. An easy to navigate events page is really, really important, and also contact details, things like that. So I can't imagine not having a website now for anything that you do. It's really, really important. It's a portal for everyone to engage with the project.
Yeah. And there's a few cool things on there. I saw that there's very local weather updates.
Oh, yeah. So one of the great things that happened when we expanded the kohanga is that one of the trustees, again, David, dead keen on ensuring that we had internet access up here as well as a weather station. So we installed solar panels on the roof. We've got an inverter and batteries inside the kohanga itself. So now we can run. We can't run anything high drain, but we can certainly run laptops and projectors so that we can actually have presentations in the kohanga if we need to, and we can run a weather centre which talks to the internet, so we can provide real-time, up-to-date information. And with that, we've got 2 web cameras. One points towards the forest, the other points towards the car park. So if in the summer you feel like a swim and you want to know how busy the swimming hole is, just jump on the website and have a look at the camera that's pointing at the car park, and you'll be able to tell if it's looped out or if it's all good and nice and peaceful. So that's a really
cool.
handy, yeah. And I'm always looking. I'm a bit of a weather nerd as well as a bird nerd, so I'm always keeping an eye on what the wind's doing up here and also what our rainfall is.
Yep.
Yeah, it's great. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's amazing. I haven't seen those ideas on any of the websites or conservation projects anywhere. So yeah, it's great.
Thank you. I can't take the credit for it. It wasn't my idea, but it's certainly I think it's a neat wee tool, and not that expensive to set up and maintain on an ongoing basis. Yep.
Are there any other innovations that are unique to the project? Or
Let me think. I mean, we've had some trustees who've done some amazing things. Barry Petherbridge springs to mind. He's a long-term volunteer. He's been on the trust for a long time. Retired farmer, and he is the one who built our rifleman nesting boxes and installed them in the forest. So he started out small, and now we've got a network. I think we rival Kāinga Ora for public housing, and we've got about 75 nest boxes scattered throughout our forest. They don't all get used, obviously, and riflemen can be notoriously fussy. They'll build trial nests and then they'll move on. But that in and of itself is quite unique, I think, having some nest boxes in the forest, and we suspect those boxes are helping with the nesting success and the fledgling success of our riflemen.
are there any future plans of what's next for Aongatete Forest Project?
So what's next? We are, with our 500 hectares, there's always been talk of the potential for us to expand, but we are constrained by volunteer effort. Volunteer numbers are fairly static from year to year. As every conservation group knows, there's a demographic of volunteers that are generally they're older, and so you've got to be really conscious of that you're replacing your or renewing your volunteer pool as those who age gracefully out of the ability to do trap lines and bait lines in the forest. But we are very fortunate in that since the Jobs for Nature scheme started, thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's shortly about to come to an end, the Manaaki Kaimai-Mamaku Trust, which has an oversight over the entire Kaimai-Mamaku forest, were able to start a group with our local hapu down at Te Rere Atakahe Marae called Te Mairi, and Te Mairi are looking after 1,000 hectares of forest to our north. In fact, we share a boundary. It's the boundary. The Aongatete River is a boundary to the north of our project, and on the other side of the river, Te Mairi are actively pest controlling. Started with 500 hectares, and now they've expanded to 1,000 hectares. So they're actually they're replicating what we're doing. They've got slightly different methodology, but they are controlling mustelids, rats, possums, and who knows, there might be the potential in future with our combined effort now of 1,500 hectares to look at a species reintroduction. But there are, there's a whole lot of hoops that you have to jump through for anything like that. It would be really neat if we could have kiwi calling here regularly again. We've only lost kiwi from this forest in the last generation, effectively, 30 odd years. Kōkako, obviously. The kōkako used to feature on the Aongatete Forest Project logo because that was the aspirational bird of choice, because we know they used to be here, and in fact there are populations further down the Mamaku Plateau, but the logo was changed a couple of years ago. I was a bit of a squeaky wheel. I said, well, why don't we have a bird on our logo that represents what we actually have here? And it's one of the success stories that Aongatete Forest Project can kind of put its hand up to. And so we changed I got the board on side, and we changed the logo to feature the titi pounamu, because of course the rifleman is in fact a bird that has gone from strength to strength in our forest. So yeah, our future plans, what we would really like to do is to be able to stop doing what we're doing, because the goal of the project when it was originally started was to provide a demonstration of what pest control could do for our forest and advocate for widespread pest control in the Kaimai Mamaku. And by widespread, it inevitably means something like an aerial pest control campaign using one of the toxins that is most effective, and that's 1080. But of course, the issues, the public perception of large-scale aerial pest control is something that's is difficult to overcome. There's a lot of stakeholders involved, and it's very hard to get agreement. So, we would like to be able to stop doing what we're doing, but we have to keep it up because re-invasion is a constant threat. Our area here is basically 1% of the entire Kaimai Mamaku forest, and the other 90, large portion of the rest of it is currently uncontrolled in terms of pest control.
And I could imagine that if you were able to stop what you're doing, you wouldn't just liquidate the project. You'd have to have new sorts of things that
absolutely
you focus on.
Yes, for sure. In fact, and you can never take your foot off pest pressure, because it's always going to be there. Eradication is the goal, but eradication, of course, as we know, is extraordinarily difficult if you're not on an offshore island. So the project would continue, but we would probably would pivot, and our focus would be something else. That's not something that we've thought about, because we're still doing the day-to-day mahi of making sure that we keep our predator pressure low in this forest.
Yeah. I suppose you could put more of that effort towards education or something like that.
Absolutely, education. There's a whole lot of amazing things we could do. This paddock, we could transform this paddock into more of an education showpiece. You don't know what the opportunities are really until you sit down and have a really good long look at it. But at the moment, it's still doing the do. Yeah.
And to achieve all of this, it obviously costs a lot.
Correct. And that's the other thing, is that restoration and conservation efforts aren't free. We rely incredibly on a huge number of volunteer hours. Between 3,000 and 4,000 volunteer hours annually go into this project. But the funding component, toxins aren't free. Bait stations aren't free. We in fact have a part of our forest is considered to be a bit too gnarly for your average volunteer to spend time in. So we actually employ a contractor to help us with our baiting rounds. We do 3 toxin campaigns a year, 3 different toxins. We're always changing it up to make sure that our nothing gets too used to any particular type of bait. And we have a contractor employed, so that costs money as well. So we are very, very lucky. We're part of the Bay of Plenty Regional Council Care Group scheme, and so we have an ongoing annual funding input from the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. They're incredibly useful in terms of the advice and support they can lend us as well. The funding's important. And then we have our other funding partners, the likes of Bay Trust, TECT, and the Western Bay of Plenty District Council. So those 4 funding sources mean that for many years, our trust spent most of their time thinking about where the next dollar was coming from to fund their pest control operations. We are now in the luxurious position of having our annual operating budget pretty much secured, so which means we can focus entirely on doing the best job possible of eradicating predators in our area. So we're in a very fortunate space, and we're always looking 2 or 3 years ahead to where to make sure that our funding is secure. But for the time being, we have the luxury of not scrabbling and not having to think about bake sales and sausage sizzles to keep our project going.
Yeah. Is it still a little bit of a constraint on what you can do though? Like, if you had like tenfold or 100-fold the money available, what sorts of things could be possible with this project?
And that's a nice situation. If we won Lotto, what would we do?
Yeah.
It's a type situation to think about. There's a myriad of things that you'd think about, whether you'd expand your footprint so that you could increase the area under control, whether you wouldn't fundamentally change what it is that you're doing. We might investigate more technologies such as, these days, the self-resetting trap technology is coming along in leaps and bounds, but we might consider that we might want to increase the amount of those sort of traps that we've got in the forest as opposed to traps that need to be checked and reset, the trusty old Doc 200, etc. We might consider fencing. Now, fencing's problematic because fences require a lot of maintenance and they're incredibly expensive per kilometre or even per metre, but we've fantasised about being able to fence the entire bloody thing, and I keep the damn deer out. That would be amazing, but that would require fence sanctuaries, as we know, are extremely expensive to manage. And I don't know what there would be a lot of other things, but it would involve primarily having a goal, like what is it we're trying to achieve, and then figuring out how best to spend the money to make that outcome a reality. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, nice. And maybe we should have a board meeting focused solely on sometimes
dreaming.
dreaming about what could be. But yes, we're a bit more pragmatic and realistic, to be quite honest.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. Is there any final things that you want to share about Aongatete Forest Project?
Well, we just have the most amazing bunch of volunteers, and I can't get over the enthusiasm and the capabilities of, especially the older cohort that we have volunteering. We have people who are in their 80s and are still making a regular effort in this forest, and without them, our work couldn't be achieved. The likes of Bay Conservation Alliance and the support that they provide to conservation groups as a whole, including us, it's nice to be able to think that if we need help in an area that's not in the wheelhouse of any of our volunteers, we've got support from those organisations. It would be awesome to have more engagement from our local community, but I understand that conservation is not everyone's priority, and quite often you've got to have the luxury of time and that enviable asset of money to be able to indulge your passions for the environment. So I'm just grateful for all those people who give us their time. It's superb. Yeah, we couldn't do it without them.
And there are regular volunteering events, aren't there?
There are. So the one thing I didn't mention is that we are extremely fortunate because of our funding situation. We were able to, in 2017, we brought on a part-time operations manager, someone who was actually paid to help us manage the day-to-day running of the project, which has alleviated the load on volunteers, and it's meant that we've got somebody who's thinking about ordering bait, arranging the contractors, making sure that there's enough coffee in the cupboard for volunteer days, that sort of stuff. And so having a part-time operations manager has made a massive amount of difference to the professionalism and organisation of the project. The operations manager works with the trust and the volunteers, and we have a regular volunteer Wednesday. So Wednesday mornings, the first and third Wednesday morning of every month, volunteer sessions in the mornings, and then we have regular volunteer Saturdays. And the Saturdays are generally when we have our major baiting campaigns throughout the year. So if there's a pre-feed round, there's a pre-feed Saturday, then there's putting out the bait, and then there's bringing the bait back in because we don't leave toxin out in the forest. So there are regular, the Saturdays are when members of the community who have got jobs basically in other lives can engage with us. So the Wednesdays tend to be restricted to those people who are either part-time or semi-retired or retired. But yep, regular engagement. It's all on the website and it's kept up to date, and we've got some incredibly talented bakers in the volunteer crew. So in general, I try to put a heavy emphasis on cakes and pikelets and biscuits because there's always something yummy on offer. So yep, if you want to be rewarded for the work that you do, Aongatete Forest Project, the right place to come if you've got a sweet tooth.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And what are those regular tasks that they would be given?
Everything from it might be mopping up a baiting campaign if we haven't managed to get all the lines covered. We've got 65 kilometres of lines and 1,000 bait stations, so there's a fair amount of time and effort and walking that goes into a baiting operation. But maintenance of those lines also, so making sure that because our forest is regenerating, the superjack don't stop growing, nor do the wheki and the mamaku ferns. So keeping the bait lines accessible to volunteers and well marked is another important task. Trapping is an incredibly important task. So we have a regular team of trappers who go out into the bush and make sure that the traps are checked and reset if needed. There's always tasks. It's funny when you've got an asset like a kohanga or a building. There's always little things that need to be done. Coats of paint that needs to be refreshed, that sort of stuff. So there's no shortage of tasks. And then there's the citizen science element of monitoring. There's our nest box program, all that sort of stuff. There's so many bits and pieces that can be done. And behind the scenes, of course, we've got volunteers who don't step foot in the forest, but they help us with administrative responsibilities. Also incredibly important.
Cool. And where do the listeners go if they want to get involved?
Best place to go would be our website, so aongateteforest.org. We have a Facebook page. Of course, we have a Facebook page, as everybody does. So Aongatete Forest on Facebook. In fact, it might just be /Aongatete. You can find us pretty easily on Facebook. But the website, first port of call, aongateteforest.org. And then if you need to contact us, the information is on obviously the contact us page. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. I'll put those links in the description for wherever this is published as well. So
perfect. Please do.
It should be nice and easy for them to
absolutely
find it.
Yep.
Cool. Amazing. Well, shall we round out there?
That sounds like a plan. I've really enjoyed
great.
talking to you. Thank you, Jordan. It's been awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. This is the first podcast I've done about the forest, and I hope listeners enjoy it.
Amazing.
Great.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.